The dust kicked up around Hannah Sullivan's boots as she stepped off the stagecoach, her heart pounding in her chest with the enormity of what she was doing. Keeler, California, 1876, nothing more than a dusty outpost nestled between the Sierra Nevada mountains and the Mojave Desert. But to Hannah, it was the furthest place she could find from Boston and the whispers that followed her there. First time in Keeler, miss. The stagecoach driver handed down her single trunk, weathered from the cross-country journey. Yes, Hannah answered, keeping her eyes low as she pushed a stray lock of auburn hair beneath her bonnet. Is there a boarding house nearby? Mrs. Peterson's, just down the street. He pointed to a 2-story white building with blue trim. Decent place for a lady. Hannah nodded her thanks, careful to keep her face partially hidden by her bonnet's brim. The late afternoon sun beat down, making her grateful for the light gloves covering her hands despite the heat. She'd grown accustomed to hiding herself away, covering the parts of her that reminded her of what she'd survived. The trunk was heavier than it looked, and Hannah struggled to drag it through the dusty street. Keeler was hardly the booming town she'd imagined from the newspaper advertisement that had brought her here. A teaching position at a newly established school seemed the perfect escape. The handful of wooden buildings lining the main street betrayed its youth as a settlement, with the Sierra Nevada mountains looming majestically behind it. Need a hand with that, madam? The deep voice startled her, and Hannah instinctively recoiled before looking up to see a tall man with sun-bronzed skin watching her with curious blue eyes. He wore a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt, chaps over his denim trousers, and a Stetson that had seen better days. Everything about him screamed cowboy, from his boots to the slight bow in his legs from years in the saddle. I'm quite capable, thank you, she answered stiffly, tightening her grip on the trunk's handle. The cowboy raised his hand slightly. No offense meant, madam, just offering assistance. Hannah softened slightly at his polite tone. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Prescott. Ryker Prescott, he said, tipping his hat. Most folks just call me Ry. Mr. Prescott, I'm on my way to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. I can manage. He nodded respectfully, though his eyes, a startling blue against his tanned face, lingered on her a moment too long. As you wish, Miss Sullivan. Hannah Sullivan. The name still felt new on her tongue, though it had been hers since birth. In Boston, she'd been poor Hannah Ellsworth for so long after her marriage, the victim, the widow. Here, she could just be Hannah Sullivan again. Welcome to Keeler, Miss Sullivan. With another tip of his hat, he stepped back, though he didn't walk away until she had moved several paces down the street. Hannah could feel his eyes on her back as she dragged her trunk toward the boarding house. It was the same feeling she'd had in Boston, being watched, judged, pitied. She'd come west to escape that very feeling, to find anonymity in a place where no one knew her name or her past. Mrs. Peterson was a round woman with silver-streaked brown hair and a no-nonsense attitude that Hannah appreciated immediately. Teaching position, is it? She asked, looking over the letter Hannah presented. School's not much, just built last winter, but the children need learning all the same. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Hannah said, following the older woman up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a bed, washstand, and small writing desk beneath a window that looked out toward the mountains. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. Lunch you're on your own. $5 a week includes meals. Mrs. Peterson handed her a key. Any questions? Hannah shook her head. No, madam. Good. Town meeting tonight at the church. You should attend, meet the folks whose children you'll be teaching. With that, she left Hannah alone with her thoughts and her trunk. The moment the door closed, Hannah sank onto the edge of the bed, removing her gloves with trembling fingers. The scars that crisscrossed her palms and climbed her wrists were white against her skin now. But she remembered when they were angry red, fresh from that night when Thomas had come home in one of his rages. The visible remnants of her attempt to protect herself from the broken whiskey bottle he'd wielded. She traced one particularly thick scar that ran from her left wrist nearly to her elbow. These weren't the worst of her scars, not by a long measure. Those were the ones no one could see, the ones that made her jump at sudden noises, that woke her screaming in the night, that made the mere thought of a man's touch send her into cold sweats. Hannah rebuttoned her sleeves, pulled her gloves back on, and began unpacking her meager possessions. She'd start fresh here. No one would ever know about Thomas Ellsworth. No one would ever look at her with that awful combination of pity and suspicion that had followed her in Boston after his death. In Keeler, she would simply be Miss Sullivan, the schoolteacher. Nothing more, nothing less. The town meeting was held in a white clapboard church that doubled as the schoolhouse. Hannah arrived early, taking a seat near the back where she could observe without being observed. As townspeople filtered in, she noted their curious glances, the polite nods of acknowledgement. Small towns were the same everywhere. Newcomers were objects of fascination. "Mind if I join you?" Hannah startled at the familiar deep voice. Ryker Prescott stood beside her pew, hat in hand. His dark hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just washed up, and he'd changed into a clean shirt with a string tie. "It's a public meeting, Mr. Prescott," she said, sliding slightly away as he sat beside her. "Call me Ryker, please. Everyone does." His smile revealed a dimple in his right cheek that somehow made him seem less intimidating. "You settling in all right at Mrs. Peterson's?" "Yes, thank you." Hannah kept her hands folded in her lap, grateful for the gloves that hid her scars. "She makes a fine apple pie on Sundays." "Worth staying in town for?" Hannah nodded politely, hoping he'd take the hint and end the conversation. Instead, he leaned slightly closer. "You don't much care for conversation, do you, Miss Sullivan?" "I prefer to keep to myself," she replied stiffly. "Fair enough." He leaned back, giving her space. "Just thought you might like to know a bit about the town, seeing as you'll be teaching our young uns." Before Hannah could respond, a gray-haired man with spectacles called the meeting to order. She learned this was Mayor Thornton, and he introduced her as the town's new schoolteacher, asking her to stand. Hannah rose briefly, nodding to the assembled townsfolk before quickly sitting back down, heat rising in her cheeks at being the center of attention. The meeting covered typical small-town matters: a need for repairs to the water pump, planning for the upcoming harvest festival, concerns about cattle rustlers in the region. Hannah listened attentively, getting a feel for the dynamics of her new home. When the meeting concluded, several parents approached to introduce themselves and their children. Hannah put on her best teacher's smile, memorizing names and faces, promising a good education while maintaining a professional distance. "Miss Sullivan," Mayor Thornton said, joining her as the crowd thinned. "We're mighty pleased to have a Boston-educated teacher here in Keeler. School starts Monday next. 32 students, ages 6 to 15. "I look forward to meeting them," Hannah replied, shaking his offered hand with a gloved one. "I see you've met Ryker Prescott," the mayor continued, nodding toward the cowboy who was deep in conversation with a group of men across the room. "He's on the school board, believe it or not. Man's got no children of his own, but he donated the land for the schoolhouse and half the lumber to build it." Hannah couldn't hide her surprise. "He's on the school board," Mayor Thornton chuckled. "Don't let the cowboy exterior fool you, Miss Sullivan. Ryker's one of the most educated men in these parts. His ranch, the Double P, is the largest in the county. Good man to have on your side." Hannah watched Ryker from across the room, reassessing. He caught her looking and tipped his head slightly, that dimple appearing again as he smiled. She quickly averted her gaze. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask," the mayor continued. "Mrs. Thornton and I live just behind the general store." "Thank you, Mayor." Hannah gathered her reticule, eager to return to the solitude of her room. "If you'll excuse me, it's been a long day." Outside, the desert air had cooled considerably. Hannah wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, walking briskly toward the boarding house. The streets were nearly empty now, most townsfolk having headed home after the meeting. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and lamplight spilled from the windows of the saloon at the far end of town. "Miss Sullivan." Hannah tensed at the sound of her name, turning to see Ryker Prescott striding toward her. He'd put his hat back on, and his spurs jingled softly with each step. "Allow me to walk you back," he said, catching up to her. "It's getting dark." "That's not necessary, Mr. Prescott." "Ryker," he corrected gently. "And it's no trouble. It's not entirely safe for a lady to walk alone after nightfall, even in Keeler." Hannah wanted to refuse but couldn't deny the logic. "Very well." They walked in silence for several moments before he spoke again. "Mayor Thornton says you're from Boston." "Yes, long way to come for a teaching position." Hannah kept her eyes on the path ahead. "I wanted a change." "Must have been some change you were looking for to come all the way to Keeler." When she didn't respond, he continued, "I've been to Boston once. Too many people for my taste, too many buildings blocking out the sky. I find the open spaces here unsettling," Hannah admitted. "There's nowhere to hide." As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Ryker glanced at her curiously. "What would you need to hide from out here?" "Nothing," Hannah said quickly. "I simply meant it's different from what I'm accustomed to." They reached the boarding house, and Hannah nearly sighed with relief. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Prescott." "Ryker," he corrected again, a hint of stubbornness in his tone. "And you're welcome, Miss Sullivan. I look forward to working with you." "As a member of the school board," he added with a smile that somehow made her both nervous and curious. "Good night," Hannah said firmly, turning toward the door. "Miss Sullivan." His voice stopped her. "Whatever brought you to Keeler, I hope you find what you're looking for here." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard, and for a brief moment, Hannah met his gaze directly. Something in those blue eyes made her heart flutter strangely, a sensation she hadn't felt in years, and one that terrified her. "Good night, Mr. Prescott," she repeated, more gently this time, before disappearing inside. In her room, Hannah's hands trembled as she removed her gloves and bonnet. She hadn't anticipated having to work with Ryker Prescott beyond casual town interactions. The thought of regular meetings, of his perceptive gaze possibly seeing through her carefully constructed walls, sent a spike of anxiety through her. She moved to the small mirror above her washstand, slowly unpinning her high-necked dress. As the fabric parted, she revealed the worst of her visible scars, an ugly, ropey mark that ran from her collarbone across her left shoulder, the result of Thomas throwing her through their glass cabinet in one of his final rages. Hannah traced the scar with her fingertip, remembering how the doctors had said she was lucky. Lucky that the glass hadn't severed an artery, lucky that her face had been spared, lucky that her dress had protected most of her torso. She hadn't felt lucky. Not when the whispers started after Thomas's death. Not when her own family had suggested she'd provoked him. Not when Boston society had slowly closed its doors to the widow Ellsworth with her strange scars and nervous demeanor. Hannah changed into her nightgown, her mind drifting back to Ryker Prescott's kind eyes and that disarming smile. She couldn't afford to be distracted by a handsome cowboy, no matter how generous or educated he might be. She'd come to Keeler to teach, to find peace, to heal if such a thing were even possible. She didn't need complications. She didn't need friendship. And she certainly didn't need a man's attention, not after what the last man in her life had done to her. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams where Thomas's face slowly morphed into Ryker's, where gentle blue eyes suddenly turned cold and threatening, where a helping hand became a fist. Hannah woke before dawn, her nightgown damp with sweat. Outside her window, the first hint of light was touching the mountains. A new day and a new life if only she could leave the old one truly behind. The week before school began passed in a flurry of preparation. Hannah threw herself into organizing the one-room schoolhouse, cleaning and arranging desks, sorting through the limited supply of books, and writing lessons on the chalkboard. The work kept her mind occupied and her interactions with the townspeople to a minimum. She saw Ryker Prescott only once, riding through town on a magnificent chestnut stallion. He'd tipped his hat to her as she emerged from the general store, but hadn't stopped to chat, for which she was grateful. The less she saw of him, the better. By Sunday evening, Hannah had transformed the schoolhouse from a dusty church annex into a proper classroom. Exhausted but satisfied, she was gathering her things to leave when the door opened, and Ryker stepped in, carrying a wooden crate. "Evening, Miss Sullivan," he said, setting the crate on her desk. "Thought you might need these." Hannah approached cautiously, peering into the crate to find it filled with books, history texts, novels, poetry collections, even scientific journals. "From my personal library," Ryker explained. Figured the school's collection might be a bit lacking. Hannah ran her fingers over a leather-bound copy of Dickens. "This is very generous, Mr. Prescott." "Ryker," he corrected automatically, "and it's nothing. Books should be read, not collecting dust on my shelves." He looked around the schoolroom. "You've done wonders with the place. Thank you." Hannah began removing the books from the crate, partly to have something to do with her hands. The children deserve a proper learning environment. Ryker leaned against the desk, watching her. "What made you become a teacher?" The question was innocent enough, but Hannah tensed. "I've always enjoyed learning, and I have a knack for explaining things to children. No family back east missing you. No." Her tone made it clear the subject was closed. Ryker seemed to understand, changing tack. "Well, the whole town's excited about school starting tomorrow. Been a while since we've had a proper teacher." "What happened to the previous one?" Hannah asked, genuinely curious. "Mr. Barton caught gold fever." "Left for the Sierra Nevada last spring." Ryker shook his head. "Don't think he found much, but hope springs eternal in these parts." Hannah nodded, continuing to arrange the books. The silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable but charged with something she couldn't name. "May I ask you something, Miss Sullivan?" Ryker finally said. Hannah stiffened. "You may ask. I don't promise to answer." His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Fair enough. I was just wondering why you always wear those gloves even indoors, even when it's warm." Hannah's hands froze on the books. Of all the questions he could have asked, this was the one she dreaded most. I have a condition. My hands are sensitive to the elements." It wasn't entirely a lie. Her scarred skin did sometimes crack in extreme weather, but that wasn't the reason for the gloves. Ryker studied her face for a moment too long, and Hannah had the unsettling feeling he saw straight through her excuse. "Must make teaching difficult sometimes," was all he said. "I manage," she replied, turning away to place books on shelves. "Was there something else you needed, Mr. Prescott?" "I should be heading back to the boarding house soon. Just wanted to make sure you have everything you need for tomorrow," he said, straightening up, "and to wish you luck with your first day." "Thank you for the books," Hannah said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "They'll be put to good use." Ryker moved toward the door but paused with his hand on the knob. "Miss Sullivan, I know it's not my place, but Whatever you're running from, you're safe here in Keeler. Hannah's heart thundered in her chest. I don't know what you mean. His expression was gentle, understanding. I recognize the look of someone carrying ghosts, that's all. Just want you to know that folks here are good people. Give them a chance. Before she could formulate a response, he tipped his hat and was gone, leaving Hannah staring at the closed door, wondering just how transparent her carefully constructed walls really were. The first day of school dawned clear and cool. Hannah arrived an hour early, arranging her desk and reviewing her lessons one last time. She wore her most professional dress, navy blue with a high collar and long sleeves, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. The gloves, as always, completed her ensemble. The children began arriving at 7:30, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. Hannah greeted each one at the door, memorizing names and faces, assessing reading abilities and mathematical knowledge with quick questions. By 8 o'clock, 32 students ranging from shy 6-year-old Jenny Wilson to gangly 15-year-old Thomas Baker filled the schoolroom. Hannah rang the small bell on her desk, calling for attention. Good morning, students. I am Miss Sullivan, and I will be your teacher. In this classroom, we will respect one another, work diligently, and expand our minds through knowledge and curiosity. She moved through the morning with the efficiency of someone who had taught before, though in truth, her experience was limited to tutoring the children of Boston's elite. The students responded well to her firm but kind approach, and by lunchtime, Hannah felt cautiously optimistic about her new position. As the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Hannah remained at her desk, reviewing their first writing assignments. The younger children's work was what she expected: wobbly letters and simple sentences, but she was impressed by some of the older students' compositions. Thomas Baker, in particular, showed a natural talent for expression that surprised her. A knock at the open door drew her attention. Ryker Prescott stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Hope I'm not interrupting, Miss Sullivan. Hannah set down her pencil. The children are at lunch. Did you need something, Mr. Prescott? School board business, he said, stepping inside. Mayor Thornton asked me to check how your first morning went. It's going well, Hannah replied. The children seem eager to learn. Ryker smiled, revealing that disarming dimple again. Glad to hear it. Any supplies you're lacking? Paper is in short supply and we could use more chalk, but we'll manage. I'll see what I can do. He glanced around the schoolroom. You've done a fine job here, Miss Sullivan. The town is fortunate to have you. Something in his sincere tone made Hannah uncomfortable with her deception. She wasn't the prim, proper Boston schoolteacher they all believed her to be. She was a widow with a past she couldn't share, teaching under her maiden name to escape the whispers. Thank you, Mr. Prescott, she said, dropping her gaze to the papers before her. I've brought something else for the school, Ryker said, reaching into his vest pocket. He pulled out a small brass key. For the cabinet in the corner, thought you might want to lock up those more valuable books when the school's empty. Hannah took the key, careful not to let their fingers touch. That's thoughtful, thank you. Ryker lingered, seeming on the verge of saying something more. The schoolyard was visible through the window behind him, children running and laughing in the autumn sunshine. Was there something else, Mr. Prescott? Ryker, he corrected, then shook his head. No, nothing important. Just wanted to say you've made quite an impression already. Mrs. Peterson says little Jenny Wilson couldn't stop talking about you at breakfast. Hannah smiled despite herself. She's a bright child. Well, I'll leave you to your work. Ryker settled his hat back on his head. School board meets every other Tuesday evening if you'd care to join us sometime. Your input would be valuable. Perhaps, Hannah said non-committally. As he turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and Miss Sullivan, there's a harvest dance coming up in a few weeks. Whole town attends. Thought you might like to know." "I don't dance, Mr. Prescott," Hannah said automatically. Something flashed in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps challenge. "Everyone dances, Miss Sullivan. Some of us just forget how for a while." With that puzzling statement, he departed, leaving Hannah staring after him, the brass key warm in her gloved palm. The afternoon lessons proceeded smoothly, and by the time Hannah dismissed the children at 4 o'clock, she felt genuinely pleased with her first day. As the last student filed out, she sank into her chair with a sigh of relief. The silence of the empty schoolroom was a balm after the day's constant vigilance. Hannah removed her right glove, flexing fingers that had grown stiff from hours of writing. The white scars crisscrossed her palm like a road map of pain. Thomas had always been careful to leave marks where they wouldn't show until that final night when his rage had exploded beyond control. She traced the longest scar, remembering the feel of the broken bottle slicing through her skin as she raised her hands to protect her face. The doctors had removed 17 glass shards from her hands and arms, 3 more from her shoulder and back. Thomas had died 2 days later, his skull fractured from the fall down their staircase as he'd lunged for her one last time. Self-defense, the authorities had ruled. But Boston society had its doubts about the quiet, scarred widow who'd inherited her husband's substantial fortune. No one had known about the years of abuse, the broken ribs that had healed crooked, the miscarriages caused by his fists. Hannah had kept those secrets locked inside along with the nightmares and the constant, crawling fear. She pulled the glove back on with a sigh. Her past was a continent away now. In Keeler, she was just Miss Sullivan, the new schoolteacher. Nothing more, nothing less. As autumn settled over Keeler, Hannah fell into a comfortable routine. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, evenings to lesson preparation, and Sundays to quiet reflection. She kept her interactions with the townspeople cordial but distant, joining church services, but declining invitations to Sunday dinners or afternoon teas. Only Mrs. Peterson seemed to understand Hannah's need for privacy, leaving her alone except to deliver occasional plates of cookies or offer practical advice about desert living. "Winter comes fast in these parts," the landlady warned one evening in late October. "Gets colder than you'd expect. Might want to invest in a warmer coat before the first snow." Hannah took the advice, purchasing a heavy wool coat from the general store. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Wallace, was full of town gossip as she wrapped the purchase. "Heard the Prescott ranch had trouble with rustlers again," she said, carefully folding tissue paper around the coat. "Third time this year. Sheriff Daniels rode out yesterday, but tracks were already cold." Hannah made an appropriate noise of concern, though her mind caught on Ryker's name. She'd seen little of him since school began, only occasional glimpses as he rode through town or brief exchanges at church on Sundays. "Such a shame," Mrs. Wallace continued. "Ryker Prescott's the finest man in these parts. Works himself to the bone for that ranch, and then thieves come along and take what isn't theirs." "Has he no family to help him?" Hannah asked before she could stop herself. Mrs. Wallace looked pleased to have engaged her in conversation. "No wife, if that's what you're asking. Had a sweetheart once, years back, but she chose city life over ranch life. Broke his heart proper." Hannah felt a strange pang at this information. "I meant workers, hands for the ranch." "Oh, he's got a fair number of cowboys working for him. Good employer by all accounts. Pays fair, treats his men well." Mrs. Wallace handed over the wrapped package. "That'll be $4.25, Miss Sullivan." Hannah paid and took her purchase, her mind still dwelling on the information about Ryker. It shouldn't matter to her whether he had a sweetheart or not. She had no interest in romantic entanglements, not after Thomas. Yet something about the shopkeeper's story made her curious about the cowboy, who donated books and land for schools and survived heartbreak. That evening, a knock at her boarding house door interrupted Hannah's lesson planning. She opened it to find a young boy, no more than 12, holding a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Prescott asked me to deliver this to you, Miss Sullivan," the boy said, thrusting the package toward her. "Thank you," Hannah said, puzzled. She reached for her reticule to offer the child a coin, but he was already clambering down the stairs. Alone in her room, Hannah unwrapped the parcel to find 3 books on teaching methods and a note written in a surprisingly elegant hand. "Miss Sullivan found these in Sacramento. Thought they might be of use. R.P." Hannah ran her gloved fingers over the embossed covers. The books were new and expensive, clearly chosen with care. The gesture touched her more deeply than she wanted to admit. How had he known she was struggling to engage some of the older boys in her lessons? Had he heard something from the students, or had he simply guessed her needs? She set the books on her desk, unsure how to respond to such an unexpected gift. A thank you note seemed insufficient, yet anything more might encourage a familiarity she wasn't ready for. In the end, she wrote a simple note. "Mr. Prescott, your generosity is appreciated. The books will be put to good use. H. Sullivan." The harvest dance arrived on the first Saturday in November. Hannah had managed to avoid committing to attendance, despite numerous invitations from parents and students. As evening fell, she sat in her room at the boarding house, listening to the distant sounds of fiddle music and laughter from the community hall. A knock at her door startled her from her reading. She opened it to find Mrs. Peterson, dressed in her Sunday best. "You're not coming to the dance, Miss Sullivan?" the landlady asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I have lessons to prepare," Hannah replied, gesturing to the books on her desk. Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. "Child, you've been in Keeler nearly 2 months now, and no one knows you any better than the day you arrived. A community needs its teacher to be part of it, not just standing at the front of a classroom." Hannah looked away. "I'm not much for social gatherings. Sometimes the things we avoid are exactly what we need." Mrs. Peterson patted Hannah's arm. "But I won't press you. Just know you're welcome, should you change your mind." After the landlady left, Hannah tried to return to her reading, but the words swam before her eyes. Was Mrs. Peterson right? Was she isolating herself too much? She'd come to Keeler to start fresh, but instead, she'd built new walls around herself different from those in Boston, but walls nonetheless. With sudden resolve, Hannah changed into her best dress, a dark green wool with minimal trim, and pinned her hair more elegantly than usual. She left the gloves on, of course. Always the gloves. The community hall was decorated with autumn leaves and paper lanterns. A small band played lively tunes while couples danced and children darted between groups of chatting adults. Hannah hesitated at the entrance, nearly losing her nerve before Mayor Thornton spotted her. "Miss Sullivan, we'd given up hope of seeing you tonight," he said, guiding her inside. "Come, let me introduce you to some folks you might not have met yet." For the next hour, Hannah circulated among the townsfolk, making polite conversation and accepting compliments on her teaching from parents. It wasn't as uncomfortable as she'd feared, though she kept a careful distance from the dance floor. "You came." The familiar deep voice sent a jolt of awareness through her. Hannah turned to find Ryker Prescott standing nearby, dressed in what passed for formal wear in Keeler clean black trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a bolo tie with a silver clasp. His hair was neatly combed and he'd clearly shaved for the occasion. "Mrs. Peterson can be very persuasive," Hannah replied. Ryker smiled. She has her ways. He glanced toward the dancers. Would you care to dance, Miss Sullivan? I don't dance, Hannah said automatically. So you mentioned before. His eyes held hers. Is it that you don't dance or that you won't? The question hit too close to home. Does it matter? I suppose not. He didn't press, and Hannah felt oddly disappointed. Would you care for some punch then? Yes, thank you. As Ryker moved toward the refreshment table, Hannah watched the dancers swirling across the floor. Once, she had loved to dance. Thomas had been charming when they first met, sweeping her off her feet at Boston society balls. It was only after their marriage that the charm had given way to control and then to cruelty. Ryker returned with 2 cups of punch. Careful, I think someone's added a touch of spirits to it. Hannah took a small sip, the slight burn confirming his warning. Thank you for the books, she said. They've been very helpful. Glad to hear it. Ryker's eyes crinkled when he smiled. I heard from young Thomas Baker that you've got him reading Shakespeare. Ambitious. He has a natural affinity for language, Hannah replied. He simply needed the right material to engage his interest. You've made quite an impression on the students in a short time. Parents too. Hannah felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. I enjoy teaching. The children here are bright and eager to learn. They fell into comfortable conversation about the school and the students. Hannah was surprised to find Ryker knowledgeable about educational theory and genuinely invested in the children's progress. As they talked, the tension in her shoulders gradually eased. You're different tonight, Ryker observed during a lull in conversation. Hannah stiffened. What do you mean? More relaxed. It suits you. His gaze was appreciative but respectful. You should smile more often, Miss Sullivan. It transforms your face. Before Hannah could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Sheriff Daniels burst into the hall, his expression grim. Fire at the Carroll place, he announced. Need men to help contain it before it spreads. The hall erupted in activity, men rushing for the door while women gathered children. Hannah set down her punch cup, uncertain what to do. Stay here, Ryker told her, already moving toward the exit. Help with the children. Hannah spent the next hour helping to organize the younger children whose parents had gone to fight the fire. She read stories to keep them calm, all the while wondering about the severity of the blaze. The Carroll farm was on the outskirts of town, close enough to be concerning, but far enough that the town itself wasn't in immediate danger. It was well past midnight when the firefighters returned, smoke-stained and weary. Hannah listened as Mayor Thornton reported that the barn had been lost, but the house saved, and no one seriously injured. She scanned the crowd for Ryker, finally spotting him near the door. His shirt was blackened with soot, and a smear of ash crossed his forehead. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition, of shared relief. As the hall emptied, families heading home after the excitement, Hannah found herself walking beside Ryker toward the boarding house. You should have that looked at, she said, nodding toward a burn on his forearm where his sleeve had been rolled up. It's nothing, he dismissed. Had worse from branding cattle. They walked in comfortable silence until reaching Mrs. Peterson's. On the porch, Hannah turned to him. Thank you for escorting me, my pleasure. Ryker studied her face in the moonlight. Miss Sullivan, Hannah, she interrupted, surprising herself. You may call me Hannah. His smile was slow and pleased. Hannah, I'd like to call on you properly sometime, perhaps Sunday after church. The request sent a flutter of panic through her chest. This was exactly what she'd been avoiding: personal connections, expectations, the possibility of questions she couldn't answer. I don't think that would be wise, she said softly, because of whatever you're running from. Ryker's question was gentle but direct. Hannah's breath caught. I'm not running from anything. We're all running from something, Hannah. His blue eyes were knowing. Some ghosts are just more persistent than others. You don't know anything about me, she said, fear making her voice sharp. I know you're kind to children who struggle. I know you're patient with old Mrs. Wilson when she asks the same question 3 times. I know you stay late at the school helping Thomas Baker with his reading. Ryker's voice softened. And I know you're afraid, though I don't know of what. Hannah's eyes burned with unexpected tears. Please, Mr. Prescott, Ryker, he corrected gently. Ryker, whatever you think you see in me, you're mistaken. I'm simply a schoolteacher trying to do my job. All right. He stepped back, respecting her space. But my invitation stands. Sunday after church, just a walk, nothing more. Hannah hesitated, then nodded slightly. Just a walk. His smile was worth the moment of courage. Good night, Hannah. Good night, Ryker. Inside her room, Hannah removed her gloves with trembling fingers. What was she doing? Agreeing to a walk with Ryker Prescott. She'd come to Keeler to escape, to hide, not to form attachments that might lead to questions she couldn't answer. Yet something about the cowboy's steady presence calmed her racing thoughts. He saw too much, noticed too much, but he didn't press or demand. He simply waited, offering friendship without conditions. Perhaps just this once she could allow herself to accept it. Sunday dawned clear and cold. Hannah dressed with more care than usual for church, selecting a blue dress that brought out the hints of green in her hazel eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she pinned her hair, nervous about the walk to follow. Church passed in a blur, Hannah barely hearing Reverend Miller's sermon on forgiveness and new beginnings. She was too aware of Ryker sitting several pews behind her, his gaze a tangible weight on her back. After the service, as congregants milled about outside, Ryker appeared at her side. Ready for that walk, Miss Sullivan? Several curious glances were cast their way, and Hannah knew the town gossips would be busy by supper time. Still, she nodded. Yes, though not a long one. I have lessons to prepare. They strolled away from the church, toward the edge of town where houses gave way to open country. The Sierra Nevada mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already snow-capped. Beautiful, isn't it? Ryker said, following her gaze. Different from your Boston views. Very different, Hannah agreed. Sometimes the openness is overwhelming. Took me a while to get used to it when I first came west, he admitted. Felt exposed, like anything could come at you from any direction. Hannah glanced at him, surprised. You weren't born here. Pennsylvania originally. Came west after the war. The slight tightening around his eyes suggested there was more to the story. What about you? What brought you all the way from Boston to Keeler? Hannah tensed. I told you I wanted a change. Must have been quite a change you were looking for. Ryker's tone was conversational, not prying. Boston to Keeler is about as drastic a move as one could make. Hannah was silent for a long moment, trying to decide how much to share. I needed space from certain memories. Ryker nodded, seeming to understand what she wasn't saying. The war left a lot of us with memories we'd rather forget. You fought Union cavalry. He touched his leg briefly. Took a Confederate bullet at Petersburg, nothing compared to what some men lost, but enough to leave its mark. Hannah considered this new information. Is that why you came west, to escape the memories? Partly, Ryker admitted. Partly for the opportunity. Land was available for those willing to work it, and partly because he hesitated. Because back east people looked at me differently after the war, like they were waiting for me to break. Out here, no one knew what I'd seen or done. I could just be Ryker Prescott, rancher. The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Hannah. And did it work, coming west? His smile was thoughtful. Some days better than others. The nightmares fade eventually, but you never entirely forget. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Hannah found herself oddly comforted by his admission. Perhaps he did understand more than she'd given him credit for. "My ranch is about 5 miles that way," Ryker said eventually, pointing west. "You should see it sometime. Might give you a better appreciation for this overwhelming landscape." "Perhaps," Hannah said noncommittally. They turned back toward town, the conversation shifting to lighter topics: books they'd read, places they'd seen, humorous stories about the students. Hannah was surprised to find herself laughing at Ryker's tale of a stubborn calf that had wandered into his kitchen. "Thank you for the walk," she said as they reached the boarding house. "It was pleasant, high praise indeed," Ryker teased gently. "Perhaps we could do it again next Sunday." Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Something warm flickered in Ryker's eyes. "So would I, Hannah." "So would I." As autumn deepened toward winter, Sunday walks with Ryker became a regular occurrence. Hannah found herself looking forward to them, to the easy conversation and comfortable silences they shared. Ryker never pushed for information she wasn't ready to give, and in return, she didn't press him about his war experiences. They spoke instead of books and ideas, of the students' progress, of the changing seasons and the small happenings in Keeler. Sometimes they walked the town limits. Other times, they ventured further into the surrounding countryside, Ryker pointing out native plants and wildlife, Hannah marveling at the harsh beauty of the landscape. The town noticed, of course. Hannah overheard whispers in the general store, caught knowing glances exchanged when she and Ryker sat near each other at church functions. Even her students had begun to giggle when Mr. Prescott visited the school on board business. "Mr. Prescott is sweet on you, Miss Sullivan," 11-year-old Sarah Jenkins declared boldly one day after class. "That's quite enough, Sarah," Hannah replied, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Mr. Prescott and I are colleagues, nothing more," but the truth was more complicated. In Ryker's presence, Hannah felt both more alive and more terrified than she had in years. He awakened feelings she'd thought long dead, not just physical attraction, but trust, comfort, even the tentative stirrings of hope. Yet every time they grew closer, fear would send her retreating behind her walls. What would Ryker think if he knew the truth about her past, about Thomas, about the scars she kept hidden beneath gloves and high collars? The first snow fell in early December, transforming Keeler into a winter wonderland overnight. Hannah woke to find 6 inches of snow blanketing the town and more falling. School was canceled, the roads being too treacherous for the farm children to travel safely. Hannah spent the morning at her window, watching the snow swirl against the pale sky. Around noon, a knock at her door revealed Mrs. Peterson with a tray of soup and bread. "Thought you might like some hot lunch," the landlady said, "and company if you're of a mind." Hannah welcomed both, and they sat by the small stove in her room, watching the snow through the window. "Mr. Prescott rode into town this morning," Mrs. Peterson mentioned casually. "Said he wanted to make sure the school roof was holding up under the snow weight." Hannah smiled despite herself. "The school roof, is it?" Mrs. Peterson's eyes twinkled. "That's what he claimed, though he did ask after your welfare as well." "He's a kind man," Hannah said carefully. "Kind, yes, and patient." The older woman studied Hannah. "But patience has its limits, child. Even in a man as steadfast as Ryker Prescott." Hannah looked down at her gloved hands. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." Mrs. Peterson's tone was gentle. "Whatever you're hiding behind those gloves and high collars, it doesn't define you, not unless you let it." Hannah's head jerked up. "You've noticed? I'm old, child, not blind." Mrs. Peterson patted Hannah's hand. "We all carry scars, some are just more visible than others." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. "You don't understand. Perhaps not the details, no, but I understand fear and shame. The landlady's gaze was knowing. And I understand that neither serves any purpose except to keep us trapped in the past. Before Hannah could respond, another knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Peterson rose to answer it, revealing Ryker standing in the hallway, snowflakes melting on his hat and shoulders. "Mr. Prescott," Mrs. Peterson greeted. "What a coincidence! We were just discussing you." "Mrs. Peterson," Ryker nodded respectfully, though his eyes sought Hannah's. "Miss Sullivan." "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." Mrs. Peterson gathered the lunch dishes. "I was just leaving. These old bones need a nap on snowy days." She winked at Hannah as she passed, closing the door behind her with a decisive click. Hannah stood awkwardly by the window, suddenly very aware of Ryker's presence in her private space. "You rode into town in this weather. Had business at the bank," he said, removing his hat. Snow from his boots was melting on the wooden floor. "Thought I'd check on you while I was here." "That's thoughtful but unnecessary. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine." Ryker studied her, his blue eyes disconcertingly perceptive. "Are you fine, I mean?" Something in his tone made Hannah look away. "Of course." Hannah. Just her name, but the way he said it made her meet his gaze again. "I think it's time we stopped pretending." Her heart raced. "Pretending that there's nothing between us but friendship." Ryker stepped closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. "I care for you, Hannah, more than I should, perhaps, given how little you've shared of yourself. But I can't help it." Hannah's throat tightened. "Ryker, please let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I know you're running from something. Someone, maybe. I know you carry scars that go deeper than whatever you're hiding beneath those gloves, and I know you're afraid to trust again." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Ryker's gaze was steady. "Whatever it is, Hannah, it won't change how I feel about you." "You can't promise that," she whispered. "I can, and I do." He moved closer slowly, like one would approach a frightened animal. "Let me in, Hannah. Whatever demons you're fighting, you don't have to face them alone anymore." The tenderness in his voice broke something loose inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as years of carefully maintained control crumbled. "I was married," she said, the words rushing out like water through a broken dam. "In Boston. His name was Thomas Ellsworth." Ryker nodded, encouraging her to continue. "He was charming at first, attentive. The most eligible bachelor in Boston, and he chose me." Hannah's voice turned bitter. "I thought I was so fortunate." She moved to the window, staring out at the falling snow. "The change came gradually. First, it was criticism, my appearance, my friends, my interests. Then control where I went, who I saw. Then the violence started." Ryker's expression darkened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "The first time he apologized so beautifully, brought me flowers, jewelry, promised it would never happen again." Hannah laughed humorlessly. "I believed him. Women always do, don't they, the first time?" "Hannah, but it wasn't the last time. It got worse. Much worse." Her hands trembled as she reached for her right glove. "He was careful at first, never leaving marks where they could be seen, but eventually he stopped caring." Slowly she removed the glove, revealing the web of white scars across her palm and wrist. Then the left glove, showing similar marks. "Broken whiskey bottle. He was aiming for my face." Ryker's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "How long?" "5 years." Hannah couldn't look at him. 5 years of hell that I was too ashamed, too afraid to escape. And now, is he dead?" Hannah's voice was flat. "He fell down the stairs during his final rage, fractured his skull. The authorities ruled it self-defense, but there were whispers, suspicions." She finally turned to face him. "So now you know. I'm not Miss Hannah Sullivan, the respectable Boston schoolteacher. I'm Hannah Ellsworth, abused wife and suspected killer. Ryker was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Hannah waited for the disgust, the judgment, the retreat she'd seen in others' eyes in Boston. Instead, he crossed the room in 3 strides and took her scarred hands gently in his. "No, you're Hannah Sullivan, the strongest woman I've ever met." Hannah stared at him, uncomprehending. "You survived," Ryker said, his thumbs stroking lightly over her scars. "You protected yourself when no one else would. And then you found the courage to start over, alone, thousands of miles from everything familiar." Fresh tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "You don't think I think you're remarkable," Ryker interrupted. "And I think I'm falling in love with you, Hannah Sullivan." The confession stole her breath. "How can you say that, after what I've told you, because of what you've told me?" Ryker raised one hand to gently cup her cheek. "Because now I understand the courage it takes for you to simply face each day. Because despite everything you've endured, you still have such compassion for your students, such dedication to their futures." Hannah trembled beneath his touch. "I'm broken, Ryker, damaged in ways you can't imagine." "Wounded," he corrected, "not broken, never broken." His blue eyes held hers. "And wounds can heal, Hannah, given time, given care. I don't know if I can." She couldn't finish the thought. "Trust again." Ryker's smile was sad but understanding. "I know, I'm not asking for promises, Hannah. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that not all men are like Thomas Ellsworth." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, her scarred palms in his calloused ones. Such different marks from such different lives, yet somehow fitting together. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper. "So am I," Ryker confessed. "Scared I'll do or say something wrong, scared I'll push too hard or not be patient enough, scared I won't be worthy of the trust you might someday place in me." The honesty of his admission touched her deeply. "One day at a time," she suggested, her voice small but hopeful. Ryker's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "One day at a time," he agreed, slowly, cautiously. He raised her scarred hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her palm. The tenderness of the gesture brought fresh tears to Hannah's eyes, not tears of pain or fear this time, but of something that felt almost like hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Keeler in pristine white, covering the old and worn with something new and clean. A fitting metaphor, Hannah thought, for the fragile beginning taking root in her heart. As winter settled over Keeler, Hannah and Ryker's relationship developed slowly, carefully. Their Sunday walks continued, now more intimate as barriers of secrecy fell away. Hannah shared more details of her life with Thomas, the horrors she'd endured, the shame that had driven her west. Ryker listened without judgment, offering comfort when she needed it, space when she didn't. In turn, he opened up about his own past, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him from the war, the fiancée who'd rejected him upon his return with a slight limp and haunted eyes, his journey west to find peace in open spaces and honest work. "My war scars are mostly inside," he told her one frigid January afternoon as they sat by the fire in Mrs. Peterson's parlor. "But I understand what it's like to feel marked by your past." Hannah nodded, no longer wearing gloves in his presence. "Do they ever truly heal, the invisible wounds?" "Not completely," Ryker admitted, "but they fade, become part of you rather than defining you." Christmas brought Hannah's first public appearance as Ryker's acknowledged sweetheart at the town's holiday celebration. She wore a new dress, dark red with lace at the collar and cuffs, but still kept her gloves on in public, not yet ready for the town's questions. Ryker respected her boundaries, never rushing her, never demanding more than she could give. Their first kiss came on New Year's Eve, a gentle, questioning touch of lips that left Hannah breathless and trembling, not with fear, but with a tentative joy she'd thought forever lost to her. "Happy New Year, Hannah," Ryker whispered against her lips, his eyes reflecting the stars above Keeler's main street where the town had gathered to welcome 1877. "Happy New Year," she replied, and for the first time in years she truly believed it might be. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Hannah found herself shedding layers along with the season, first the heavier dresses, then the constant wariness in her eyes. She still wore her gloves in public, still startled at sudden movements or loud noises, but less frequently, less intensely. In late March, Ryker formally asked permission to court her, an old-fashioned gesture that made Hannah smile. "Seems to me you've been courting her these past 4 months," Mrs. Peterson observed dryly when he approached her as Hannah's de facto guardian. "Not properly," Ryker insisted. "I want to do this right." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened. "You're a good man, Ryker Prescott." She deserves nothing less. With the landlady's blessing, Ryker began calling on Hannah at the boarding house several evenings a week, in addition to their Sunday walks. He brought small gifts, wildflowers from the ranch, a new book of poetry, a handkerchief he'd asked his housekeeper to embroider with her initials. Each gift was thoughtful rather than extravagant, each visit respectful of her space and boundaries. Hannah found herself looking forward to the sound of his boots on the boarding house steps, the gentle knock at her door, the warmth of his smile when she opened it. Spring also brought changes to the school. With the weather improving, Hannah began taking her students outdoors for some lessons, teaching botany with actual plants and astronomy under the vast desert sky. Ryker occasionally joined these excursions, sharing his knowledge of local flora and fauna, or simply helping to wrangle the more energetic children. The townsfolk watched the developing romance with approval. Hannah Sullivan had proven herself a dedicated teacher, and Ryker Prescott was Keeler's most respected citizen. That they had found happiness together seemed only right to most observers. Only Hannah and Ryker knew the careful dance they performed, the nightmares that still occasionally woke her screaming. The moments when a too quick movement or an accidental touch sent her spiraling into panic. The patient way he talked her through these episodes, never pushing, never demanding, always understanding. In late April, as wildflowers painted the desert in unexpected color, Ryker invited Hannah to visit his ranch for the first time. "Sunday after church," he suggested. "I'll bring the buggy. Mrs. Peterson can chaperone if it would make you more comfortable." Hannah smiled at his consideration. "I think we're past the need for chaperones, Ryker, but thank you for offering." The Double P Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of varied terrain, grazing land for cattle, rocky outcroppings, even a small stream that provided precious water. The main house was larger than Hannah had expected, built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. "My father always said a house should have a proper porch," Ryker explained as he helped her from the buggy, "for watching sunsets and greeting visitors." Inside, the house was a comfortable blend of practical ranch furnishings and unexpected touches of refinement, books lining one wall of the main room, a piano in the corner, landscape paintings brightening the log walls. "It's lovely," Hannah said, genuinely impressed. "So much more than I expected." Ryker smiled. "What did you expect? A dirt floor and cow hides for curtains?" Hannah laughed, a sound that came more easily these days. "Perhaps not quite so rustic, but certainly not a piano. My mother insisted on bringing it west." Ryker ran his hand lovingly over the instrument. "Said civilization followed music. Do you play?" Hannah hesitated. "I used to, before." She flexed her scarred hands unconsciously, understanding crossed Ryker's face. The scars affect your playing. Sometimes my fingers stiffen, Hannah admitted. And Thomas. He didn't approve of frivolous activities. Something dark flashed in Ryker's eyes at the mention of her late husband, quickly controlled. Would you try? For me? Hannah approached the piano cautiously, running her fingers over the keys without pressing them. It's been years. No critics here, Ryker assured her. Just me. Slowly, Hannah began to play a simple melody at first, her fingers remembering the patterns despite the years of silence. The notes filled the ranch house, hesitant at first, then flowing more confidently as muscle memory returned. When she finished, Hannah realized there were tears on her cheeks, tears of release, of reclaiming something Thomas had taken from her. Ryker moved to sit beside her on the bench, careful not to crowd her. That was beautiful. I'd forgotten how much I loved it, Hannah whispered. He took so many things from me, Ryker, so many parts of myself. But he didn't destroy them, Ryker said gently. They were just waiting for you to find them again. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. You're reclaiming yourself, Hannah, piece by piece. The tenderness in his touch and his words filled Hannah with courage. She leaned forward and kissed him, the first time she had initiated such contact between them. Ryker responded gently, letting her set the pace, his hands resting lightly at her waist. When they parted, his eyes were full of wonder and love. Hannah, I'm learning to trust again, she whispered, because of you. Ryker's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. After that day, Hannah visited the ranch regularly. She grew comfortable with the space, with the ranch hands who tipped their hats respectfully to the boss's lady, with the routines of ranch life so different from her Boston upbringing or her Keeler teaching. In late May, as the school year neared its end, Ryker approached Hannah with a proposition. The ranch house needs a woman's touch, he said as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. Mrs. Wilson does her best with the cooking and cleaning, but she's getting on in years. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me a position as your housekeeper, Mr. Prescott? Ryker laughed. Not exactly. He took her hand, running his thumb gently over her scars, a gesture that had become a tender habit between them. I'm saying this house, this ranch, could be yours. If you wanted it to be. Hannah's heart raced. Ryker, are you not proposing? Not yet. His eyes held hers. I know you're not ready for that, and I respect it, but I want you to know that's where my heart is headed, Hannah, where I hope we're headed when you're ready. Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for marriage again. Then we'll continue as we are, Ryker said simply. Your friendship, your trust, they're gifts I never expected to find in this life, Hannah. I won't risk them by pushing for more than you can give. Hannah studied his face, the openness of his expression, the patience and understanding in his eyes. What did I do to deserve you, Ryker Prescott? You survived, he said simply. And in surviving, you taught me what true strength looks like. The school term ended in early June with a celebration that brought the entire town to the schoolhouse. Students presented their achievements, parents expressed their gratitude, and Mayor Thornton announced that the school board had unanimously voted to offer Miss Sullivan a permanent position as Keeler's teacher. Assuming she'll have us for another year, the mayor added with a knowing glance between Hannah and Ryker. Hannah accepted graciously, though privately she wondered what the future held. Her feelings for Ryker had deepened into something profound and healing, but the specter of her past still haunted her. Could she truly build a new life here? Could she ever fully leave Hannah Ellsworth behind? The answer came unexpectedly in mid-June, when Hannah received a letter forwarded from Boston. The return address made her blood run cold. Thomas's sister, Eleanor, the most vocal of those who had whispered accusations after his death. Hannah's hands trembled so badly she could barely open the envelope. Inside was a brief note. "Mrs. Ellsworth, I write to inform you that in going through my late brother's effects, I have discovered his journal. Its contents have forced me to reconsider many things, including my judgment of you. If you would permit it, I would like to offer my sincere apology for the pain my family caused you after Thomas's death. We did not understand the truth of your situation. I pray you have found peace. Eleanor Ellsworth Wilson." Hannah sank onto her bed, the letter clutched in her scarred hands. Thomas's journal, the private record of his thoughts, his rage, perhaps even his violence. And Eleanor had read it, had finally seen the truth that Hannah had kept hidden out of shame and fear. She was still sitting there when Mrs. Peterson knocked at her door. "Mr. Prescott is downstairs, dear." Hannah nodded numbly. "Tell him I'll be right down." When she descended the stairs, Ryker took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "Hannah, what's happened?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his expression darkening, then softening into concern. "How do you feel about this?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted. Validated, relieved, angry that it took his own words for them to believe me. "All of those seem appropriate," Ryker said gently. They walked to the small park at the center of town, finding a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. Hannah sat in silence for a long moment, processing. "For years, I lived with the knowledge that his family blamed me," she finally said. "That Boston society whispered about me, that no one truly believed what he was capable of." Ryker listened, giving her space to work through her thoughts. "I came west to escape those whispers, to start fresh where no one knew my shame." Hannah looked down at her scarred hands. "But I brought the shame with me, didn't I? Hiding behind gloves and high collars, jumping at shadows, afraid to trust." "You did what you needed to survive," Ryker said. "There's no shame in that." "No," Hannah agreed slowly. "There isn't. The shame was never mine to carry, was it? It was his." Ryker took her hand, his touch grounding her. "Yes, Eleanor's letter doesn't change the past," Hannah continued. "It doesn't erase the scars or the nightmares. But it changes something in me, Ryker, knowing that the truth is finally acknowledged, even if only by his sister." "It sets you free," Ryker finished softly. Hannah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, free to stop running, free to stop hiding." Ryker's eyes were full of love and pride. "What will you do with this freedom?" Hannah looked up at the vast blue sky, at the mountains in the distance, at the small town that had become her home. Then she looked at the man beside her, the man who had patiently loved her through her fear and pain. "Live," she said simply. "Fully live for the first time in so many years." The next Sunday, Hannah went to church without her gloves. She felt the curious glances, heard the whispered questions about the scars crisscrossing her hands and wrists. But she held her head high, drawing strength from Ryker's steady presence beside her. After the service, Mrs. Peterson approached, tears in her eyes. "Proud of you, child," she whispered, squeezing Hannah's bare hand. Others followed, some awkward, some curious, but all respectful. Hannah answered their questions honestly but briefly. "Old injuries," she would say, "from another life." By the end of June, the gossip had faded. The scars became just another part of Miss Sullivan, like her auburn hair or her skill with difficult students. Hannah began playing the piano at Sunday services, her scarred fingers moving gracefully over the keys, creating beauty from what had once been only pain. On the last day of June, Ryker took her on a picnic in a wildflower meadow on the ranch. They sat on a blanket beneath a sprawling oak tree, watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. "I have something for you," Ryker said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. Hannah's breath caught. "Ryker." "Just listen," he said gently. You told me once that Thomas took pieces of you. I've watched you reclaim those pieces one by one. Your music, your confidence, your trust. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a small diamond. I'm not asking you to be my wife today, Hannah. I'm asking if I may hope that someday, when you've reclaimed all the pieces of yourself that you want back, you might consider adding one more piece of life with me. Tears blurred Hannah's vision as she looked at the ring, at Ryker's hopeful expression. You'd wait. Even not knowing how long it might take, I'd wait forever, he said simply, but I don't think it will take that long. Hannah laughed through her tears. No, neither do I. She held out her left hand, scarred, imperfect, but strong. I don't need to wait to know that I love you, Ryker Prescott. That I want a future with you. Joy blazed in Ryker's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Is that a yes? It's a not yet, but soon, Hannah clarified. I need a little more time, just a little. Ryker kissed her, a kiss full of promise and patience. Take all the time you need. I'll be right here. Summer passed in a golden haze of contentment. Hannah divided her time between preparing for the new school year and helping Ryker with improvements to the ranch house. They chose new curtains together, rearranged furniture, discussed where her books would fit among his. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked of the future children they might have, places they might visit, dreams they wanted to pursue together. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, Hannah's head resting on Ryker's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The nightmares came less frequently now. When they did come, Hannah no longer suffered alone. She would write to Ryker, and the next evening he would ride to town just to sit with her, to remind her that she was safe, that Thomas was gone, that she was loved for exactly who she was, scars and all. August brought scorching heat and the final preparations for the new school year. Hannah had 19 new students enrolled, bringing her total to 51, too many for the small schoolhouse. We'll need to expand, Mayor Thornton said during a school board meeting. Perhaps add a second room, hire an assistant for Miss Sullivan. I might have a solution, Ryker offered. The old Peterson barn at the edge of my property. With some work, it could be converted into a fine schoolhouse. 2 rooms, an office for Miss Sullivan, proper outhouses, room to grow. The board members exchanged glances. That's mighty generous, Ryker, the mayor said. But it's a fair distance from town. 3 miles, Ryker acknowledged. But flat, good road, and I'd provide a wagon to transport children who live in town. The real meaning behind his offer wasn't lost on anyone present. A new schoolhouse on Ryker's land meant Hannah would live at the ranch as well as his wife. The board approved the plan unanimously, with construction to begin immediately, so the new schoolhouse would be ready by spring. In the meantime, the town's meeting hall would serve as a temporary second classroom for the older students. As Hannah and Ryker left the meeting, she squeezed his hand. That was quite a declaration of intent, Mr. Prescott. Ryker grinned, unrepentant. Figured it was time to make my intentions clear to the whole town. Any objections, Miss Sullivan? Hannah pretended to consider. Well, I do wonder about the propriety of the schoolmistress living so close to the schoolhouse. People might talk. Let them, Ryker said, his blue eyes twinkling. Besides, I reckon the schoolmistress's husband would have something to say if anyone spoke ill of her. Hannah's heart skipped. Is that a proposal, Ryker Prescott? That depends. He stopped walking, turning to face her in the middle of Keeler's Main Street. Is your answer still not yet, but soon? Or has soon arrived? Hannah looked into the eyes of this man who had loved her through her pain, who had waited patiently while she healed, who had never once made her feel broken or damaged or less than whole. I think, she said slowly, joy building in her chest, That soon has definitely arrived." Ryker's smile was radiant. He dropped to one knee right there in the dusty street, heedless of the townspeople watching from storefronts and boardwalks. "Hannah Sullivan, I have loved you since you dragged that trunk down this very street and refused my help. I love your strength, your compassion, your courage. I love the way you fought to reclaim yourself. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Hannah was aware of the audience they'd attracted, of Mrs. Peterson wiping tears from her eyes, of the schoolchildren giggling behind their hands. For a moment, she thought of the whispers that had followed her in Boston, the judgment in the eyes of society. Then she looked at Ryker, at the love and acceptance shining in his face, and realized that the only opinion that mattered was her own. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Ryker Prescott, I will marry you." Cheers erupted from the gathered townsfolk as Ryker stood and swept Hannah into a kiss that spoke of promises kept and new beginnings. In that moment, Hannah knew she had finally come home not to Keeler or to the ranch, but to herself, to the woman she was always meant to be. They married on the last Saturday in September, as golden aspen leaves drifted on the mountain breezes. The ceremony took place at the ranch, beneath the oak tree where Ryker had first given her the ring. Reverend Miller officiated, Mrs. Peterson stood as Hannah's witness, and the entire town of Keeler gathered to celebrate. Hannah wore a dress of ivory silk, ordered specially from Sacramento. The design was modern and elegant, with 3/4-length sleeves that left her scarred forearms visible, not hidden, not shameful, simply part of her story. As she walked toward Ryker, toward her future, Hannah thought of how far she had come from that terrified widow who had stepped off the stagecoach in Keeler 15 months earlier. The scars were still there, both the visible ones on her skin and the invisible ones on her heart. But they no longer defined her. They were simply part of the tapestry of experiences that had shaped her into the woman who now stood proudly before friends and neighbors, ready to begin a new chapter. "Hannah Sullivan," Ryker said when it came time for their vows, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you through sunshine and storm, through joy and sorrow, through health and hardship. I promise to see you, truly see you, every day of our lives together. To honor your strength, to respect your boundaries, to walk beside you rather than ahead of you. This is my solemn vow." Hannah blinked back tears as she spoke her own vows. "Ryker Prescott, you found me when I was lost, even to myself. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. You saw beyond my scars to the woman beneath. I promise to trust you with my past, my present, and my future. To build a life of honesty, respect, and joy with you. To face whatever comes not in fear, but in faith, faith in you, in us, in the healing power of love. This is my solemn vow." As Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, as Ryker's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, Hannah felt the last shadows of Thomas Ellsworth finally fade away. In their place was only light, only love, only the promise of all the days to come. The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting and toasts to the new couple. Hannah danced every dance with her husband, her scarred hands held confidently in his as they moved beneath the stars. Later, much later, they stood alone on the porch of the ranch house, their home now, truly and fully. "Happy, Mrs. Prescott?" Ryker asked, his arms around her waist as they gazed at the moon rising over the mountains. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Hannah answered truthfully. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had helped her heal, who had loved her through the pain until she found herself again. "Thank you for being patient, for waiting until I was ready." "Some things are worth waiting for," Ryker said simply. He touched her cheek gently. You know, when I first saw you dragging that trunk down the street, there was something in your eyes, a sadness, yes, but also a determination that took my breath away. I was terrified, Hannah admitted, of being found out, of being alone, of never feeling safe again. And now, Ryker's eyes held hers in the moonlight. Hannah smiled, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude and hope. Now I'm home. Their life together unfolded like a flower turning toward the sun. The new schoolhouse was completed by spring, a beautiful 2-room building with tall windows and a small bell tower. Hannah taught the older students while a young woman from Sacramento, Miss Emily Carson, was hired to teach the younger ones. Hannah continued to teach even after their first child arrived, a son they named James, born exactly a year after their wedding. Ryker built a small nursery off Hannah's office at the schoolhouse, where baby James would nap while his mother taught, occasionally visited by his proud father between ranch duties. The scars on Hannah's hands faded further with time, becoming silvery lines that she no longer felt compelled to hide. The invisible scars faded too, though more slowly. There were still nights when she woke gasping from nightmares, still moments when a certain tone of voice or unexpected movement would trigger memories of Thomas. But Ryker was always there, patient and understanding, holding her through the worst moments, celebrating the good ones. Their family grew. A daughter, Sarah, joined them 2 years after James, followed by another son, Daniel, 2 years later. The ranch prospered under Ryker's careful management, and Hannah's reputation as an educator brought students from neighboring communities to the Double P schoolhouse. In the spring of 1885, as they prepared to celebrate their 8th wedding anniversary, Hannah received another letter from Boston, this one from a young woman named Catherine Murray. "Dear Mrs. Prescott," it began, "you do not know me, but I was married to a man much like your first husband. When I read Eleanor Wilson's account of her brother's journal and your escape from that situation, it gave me courage to seek my own freedom. I am writing to thank you, and to let you know that your story has helped others you may never meet." Hannah read the letter to Ryker that evening as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. "How did this woman know our story?" Ryker asked, surprised. "Eleanor must have shared it," Hannah mused, "perhaps with other women in similar situations." Ryker was quiet for a moment, watching 9-year-old James teaching 5-year-old Daniel how to throw a lasso while 7-year-old Sarah supervised with all the authority of an older sister. "Does that bother you?" he finally asked. "That people back east know?" Hannah considered the question seriously. Once it would have. The shame would have been unbearable. She looked out at her children, then back at her husband. "But now I think perhaps my story might help other women find their courage, and there's no shame in that." Ryker's eyes shone with pride as he took her scarred hand in his. "No shame at all, my love. Only strength." Hannah leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun set behind the mountains that had become as familiar to her as the streets of Boston once were. Her journey had been long and painful, from terrified victim to survivor to this a woman fully healed, fully herself, surrounded by love and purpose. The scars would always remain, both visible and invisible. But they no longer defined her. They were simply reminders of where she had been, of what she had overcome, of the strength she had found within herself, and of the cowboy who had loved her through the pain until she healed.